In summer 2020, while on a European trip, I manifested COVID-like symptoms. However, I couldn't be tested because the database used locally for patient identification only allowed for one type of tax identification number, thus excluding those who didn't have it, foreign nationals, but also, of course, even worse, undocumented migrants. This episode was of inspiration to write my commentary for Big Data in Society entitled Techno-solutionism and the Standard Human in the Making of the COVID-19 Pandemic. The essay takes a critical approach towards quantification, counting, indicators, and comparison, but also the consumer infrastructure and the new regimes of measurements that have been devised in the attempt to curb the contagion. Surely quantification is particularly seductive in times of global uncertainty, like a pandemic. However, in the stress of this situation, we tend to forget to ask fundamental critical questions about how is counting implemented, and especially who is this counting exercise laying out. My commentary investigates the role and consequences of counting as a way of knowing about the virus. It draws insights from critical data studies, sociology of quantification, and decolonial thinking in analyzing two domains that are critical in the attempt to curb the pandemic. The first is the biomedical domain that, however, has been relying disproportionately since the early days on experimental subjects that are white, male, and typically Middle Ages. The essay asks who is left out and what does it mean in times of a global pandemic like this one. The second domain is that of the consumer infrastructure that is devised to curb the virus. Think, for example, about contact tracing apps. These apps often leave out many. Those, for example, who do not speak the national language or do not have access to a state-of-the-art smartphone. I maintain that these exercises of counting, these novel regimes of measurement, no matter how important, now critical in these difficult times, they tend to overlook alterity and inequality. They tend to construct a standard human, to say it with sociologist Stephen Epstein from Northwestern University. He wrote back in the 90s that the standard human refers to one sort of person that is, however, often used, mobilized as a stand-in for the whole humanity. And the assumptions that are made about this standard human are then extrapolated to other sorts of people. Our society cannot afford to ignore diversity and alterity. And that's where decolonial thinking comes in handy. I draw from anthropologist Arturo Escobar in thinking about design, for example, contact tracing up as well, as a conversation about possibilities. And I ask, what happens when we only consider Western ways of living, including access to resources, when we design solutions for a global virus? I maintain that instead, and again taking inspiration from Escobar, we should look at the pluriverse. We should make space for many different ways of being into the world. And in designing our ways out of the pandemic, we should consider and think in terms of diversity, social relations, flows, and interdependencies. Because only in this way we have the chance to really think about who counts as a citizen, even in time of a pandemic.